You remember what you said then, but you were wrong. Why else would anyone come to such a place in December? I wasn't laughing at you. The woman raised her head. Her face, where it had been pressed against Shimamura's hand, was red under the thick powder from the eye across the bridge of the nose. It made him think of the snow country cold, and yet, because of the darkness of her hair, there was a certain warmth in it. She smiled quietly, as though dazzled by a bright light. Perhaps, as she smiled, she thought of then, and Shimamura's words gradually colored her whole body. When she bowed her head a little stiffly, he could see that even her back, under her kimono, was flushed a deep red. Set off by the color of her hair, the moist, sensuous skin was as if laid naked before him. Her hair could not really have been called thick, stiff like a man's, and swept up into a high Japanese-style coiffure with not a hair out of place. It glowed like some heavy black stone. Shimamura looked at the hair and wondered whether the coldness that had so startled him — he had never touched such cold hair, he said — might be less the cold of the snow country winter than something in the hair itself. The woman began counting on her fingers. For some time she counted on. "What are you counting?" he asked. Still the counting continued. "It was the 23rd of May. You're counting the days, are you? Don't forget that July and August are 2 long months in a row. It's the 199th day. It's exactly 199 days. How did you remember it was the 23rd of May? All I have to do is look in my diary." "You keep a diary?" "It's always fun to read an old diary, but I don't hide anything when I write in my diary, and sometimes I'm ashamed to look at it myself." "When did you begin?" "Just before I went to Tokyo as a geisha. I didn't have any money, and I bought a plain notebook for 2 or 3 sen and drew in lines. I must have had a very sharp pencil. The lines are all neat and close together, and every page is crammed from top to bottom. When I had enough money to buy a diary, it wasn't the same anymore. I started taking things for granted. It's that way with my writing practice, too. I used to write on newspapers before I even thought of trying good paper, but now I set it down on good paper from the start." "And you've kept the diary all this time?" "Yes. The year I was 16 and this year have been the best. I write in my diary when I'm home from a party and ready for bed, and when I read it over I can see places where I've gone to sleep writing. But I don't write every day. Some days I miss. Way off here in the mountains, every party's the same. This year I couldn't find anything except a diary with a new day on each page. It was a mistake. When I start writing, I want to write on and on." But even more than at the diary, Shimamura was surprised at her statement that she had carefully catalogued every novel and short story she had read since she was 15 or 16. The record already filled 10 notebooks. "You write down your criticisms, do you?" "I can never do anything like that. I just write down the author and the characters and how they are related to each other. That is about all." "But what good does it do?" "None at all. A waste of effort." "A complete waste of effort," she answered brightly, as though the admission meant little to her. She gazed solemnly at Shimamura, however. "A complete waste of effort." For some reason, Shimamura wanted to stress the point, but drawn to her at that moment, he felt a quiet like the voice of the rain flow over him. He knew well enough that for her it was in fact no waste of effort, but somehow the final determination that it was had the effect of distilling and purifying the woman's existence. Her talk of novels seemed to have little to do with literature in the everyday sense of the word. The only friendly ties she had with the people of this village had come from exchanging women's magazines, and afterwards she had gone on with the reading by herself. She was quite indiscriminate and had little understanding of literature, and she borrowed even the novels and magazines she found lying in the guest rooms at the inn. Not a few of the new novelists whose names came to her meant nothing to Shimamura. Her manner was as though she were talking of a distant foreign literature. There was something lonely, something sad in it, something that rather suggested a beggar who has lost all desire. It occurred to Shimamura that his own distant fantasy on the Western ballet, built up from words and photographs in foreign books, was not in its way dissimilar. She talked on happily, too, of movies and plays she had never seen. She had no doubt been starved all these months for someone who would listen to her. Had she forgotten that 199 days earlier, exactly this sort of conversation had set off the impulse to throw herself at Shimamura? Again she lost herself in the talk, and again her words seemed to be warming her whole body. But her longing for the city had become an undemanding dream, wrapped in simple resignation, and the note of wasted effort was much stronger in it than any suggestion of the exile's lofty dissatisfaction. She did not seem to find herself especially sad, but in Shimamura's eyes there was something strangely touching about her. Were he to give himself quite up to that consciousness of wasted effort, Shimamura felt, he would be drawn into a remote emotionalism that would make his own life a waste. But before him was the quick, live face of the woman, ruddy from the mountain air. In any case, he had revised his view of her, and he had found, surprisingly, that her being a geisha made it even more difficult for him to be free and open with her. Dead drunk that night, she had savagely bitten her half-paralyzed arm in a fit of irritation at its recalcitrance. "What's the matter with you? Damn you, damn you. Lazy, worthless. What's the matter with you?" And unable to stand, she had rolled from side to side. "I'll never have any regrets. But I'm not that sort of woman. I'm not that sort of woman." The midnight for Tokyo. The woman seemed to sense his hesitation, and she spoke as if to push it away. At the sound of the train whistle, she stood up. Roughly throwing open a paper-paneled door in the window behind it, she sat down on the sill with her body thrown back against the railing. The train moved off into the distance, its echo fading into a sound as of the night wind. Cold air flooded the room. "Have you lost your mind?" Shimamura, too, went over to the window. The air was still, without a suggestion of wind. It was a stern night landscape. The sound of the freezing of snow over the land seemed to roar deep into the earth. There was no moon. The stars, almost too many of them to be true, came forward so brightly that it was as if they were falling with the swiftness of the void. As the stars came nearer, the sky retreated deeper and deeper into the night color. The layers of the border range, indistinguishable one from another, cast their heaviness at the skirt of the starry sky in a blackness grave and somber enough to communicate their mass. The whole of the night scene came together in a clear, tranquil harmony. As she sensed Shimamura's approach, the woman fell over with her breast against the railing. There was no hint of weakness in the pose. Rather, against the night, it was the strongest and most stubborn she could have taken. "So we have to go through that again," thought Shimamura. Black though the mountains were, they seemed at that moment brilliant with the color of the snow. They seemed to him somehow transparent, somehow lonely. The harmony between sky and mountains was lost. Shimamura put his hand to the woman's throat. "You'll catch cold. See how cold it is." He tried to pull her back, but she clung to the railing. "I'm going home." Her voice was choked. "Go home, then. Let me stay like this a little longer." "I'm going down for a bath." "No, stay here with me. If you close the window. Let me stay here like this a little longer." Half the village was hidden behind the cedars of the shrine grove. The light in the railway station, not 10 minutes away by taxi, flickered on and off as if crackling in the cold. The woman's hair, the glass of the window, the sleeve of his kimono, everything he touched was cold in a way Shimamura had never known before. Even the straw mats under his feet seemed cold. He started down to the bath. "Wait, I'll go with you." The woman followed meekly. As she was rearranging the clothes he had thrown to the floor outside the bath, another guest, a man, came in. The woman crouched low in front of Shimamura and hid her face. "Excuse me." The other guest started to back away. "No, please," Shimamura said quickly. "We'll go next door." He scooped up his clothes and stepped over to the woman's bath. The woman followed as if they were married. Shimamura plunged into the bath without looking back at her. He felt a high laugh mount to his lips now that he knew she was with him. He put his face to the hot water tap and noisily rinsed his mouth. Back in the room, she raised her head a little from the pillow and pushed her side hair up with her little finger. "This makes me very sad." She said only that. Shimamura thought for a moment that her eyes were half open, but he saw that the thick eyelashes created the illusion. The woman, always high-strung, did not sleep the whole night. It was apparently the sound of the obi being tied that awakened Shimamura. "I'm sorry. I should have let you sleep. It's still dark. Look, can you see me?" She turned off the light. "Can you see me? You can't." "I can't see you. It's still pitch dark." No. I want you to look close. Now. Can you see me?" She threw open the window. "It's no good. You can see me. I'm going." Surprised anew at the morning cold, Shimamura raised his head from the pillow. The sky was still the color of night, but in the mountains it was already morning. "But it's all right. The farmers aren't busy this time of the year, and no one will be out so early. But do you suppose someone might be going out into the mountains?" She talked on to herself, and she walked about, trailing the end of the half-tied obi. There were no guests on the 5 o'clock from Tokyo. None of the inn people will be up for a long while yet. Even when she had finished tying the obi, she stood up and sat down and stood up again, and wandered about the room with her eye on the window. She seemed on edge, like some restless night beast that fears the approach of the morning. It was as though a strange magical wildness had taken her. Presently the room was so light that he could see the red of her cheeks. His eye was fastened on that extraordinarily bright red. "Your cheeks are flaming. That's how cold it is." "It's not from the cold. It's because I've taken off my powder. I only have to get into bed, and in a minute I'm warm as an oven, all the way to my feet." She knelt at the mirror by the bed. "It's daylight. I'm going home." Shimamura glanced up at her and immediately lowered his head. The white in the depths of the mirror was the snow, and floating in the middle of it were the woman's bright red cheeks. There was an indescribably fresh beauty in the contrast. Was the sun already up? The brightness of the snow was more intense. It seemed to be burning icily. Against it, the woman's hair became a clearer black, touched with a purple sheen. Probably to keep snow from piling up, the water from the baths was led around the walls of the inn by a makeshift ditch, and in front of the entrance it spread out like a shallow spring. A powerful black dog stood on the stones by the doorway lapping at the water. Skis for the hotel guests, probably brought out from a storeroom, were lined up to dry, and the faint smell of mildew was sweetened by the steam. The snow that had fallen from the cedar branches to the roof of the public bath was breaking down into something warm and shapeless. By the end of the year, that road would be shut off from sight by the snowstorms. She would have to go to her parties in long rubber boots with baggy mountain trousers over her kimono, and she would have a cape pulled around her and a veil over her face. The snow would by then be 10 feet deep. The woman had looked down on the steep road from the window of the inn, high on a hill, before daybreak this morning, and now Shimamura was walking down the same road. Diapers hung high beside the road to dry. Under them stretched the vista of the border range, the snow on its peaks glowing softly. The green onions in the garden patches were not yet buried in the snow. Children of the village were skiing in the fields. As he started into the part of the village that fronted on the highway, he heard a sound as of quiet rain. Little icicles glistened daintily along the eaves. While you're at it, would you mind shoveling a little from ours? Dazzled by the bright light, a woman on her way back from the bath wiped at her forehead with a damp towel as she looked up at a man shoveling snow from a roof. A waitress, probably, who had drifted into the village a little in advance of the skiing season. Next door was a cafe with a sagging roof, its painted window flaking with age. Rows of stones held down the shingles with which most of the houses along the street were roofed. Only on the side exposed to the sun did the round stones show their black surfaces, less a moist black from the melting snow than an less a moist black from the melting snow than an inkstone black, beaten away at by icy wind and storm. The houses were of a kind with the dark stones on their roofs. The low eaves hugging the ground seemed to have in them the very essence of the North Country. Children were breaking off chunks of ice from the drains and throwing them down in the middle of the road. It was no doubt the sparkle of the ice as it went flying off into bits that enchanted them so. Shimamura, standing in the sunlight, found it hard to believe that the ice could be so thick. He stopped for a moment to watch. A girl of 12 or 13 stood knitting apart from the rest, her back against a stone wall. Under the baggy mountain trousers, her feet were bare but for sandals, and Shimamura could see that the soles were red and cracked from the cold. A girl of perhaps 2 stood on a bundle of firewood beside her, patiently holding a ball of yarn. Even the faded ashen line of reclaimed yarn from the younger girl to the older seemed warmly aglow. He could hear a carpenter's plane in a ski shop 7 or 8 doors down the street. 5 or 6 geisha were talking under the eaves opposite. Among them, he was sure, would be the woman, komako. He had just that morning learned her geisha name from a maid at the inn. And indeed, there she was. She had apparently noticed him. The deadly serious expression on her face set her off from the others. She would of course flush scarlet, but if she could at least pretend that nothing had happened, before Shimamura had time to go further with his thoughts, he saw that she had flushed to the throat. She might better have looked away, but her head turned little by little to follow him, while her eyes were fixed on the ground in acute discomfort. Shimamura's cheeks, too, were aflame. He walked briskly by, and immediately Komako came after him. You mustn't. You embarrass me, walking by at a time like this. I embarrass you. You think I'm not embarrassed myself with all of you lined up to waylay me? I can hardly make myself walk past. Is it always this way? Yes, I suppose so, in the afternoon. But I think you'd be even more embarrassed, turning bright red and then chasing after me. What difference does it make? The words were clear and definite, but she was blushing again. She stopped and put her arm around a persimmon tree beside the road. I ran after you because I thought I might ask you to come by my house. Is your house near here? Very near. I'll come if you'll let me read your diary. I'm going to burn my diary before I die. But isn't there a sick man in your house? How did you know? You were at the station to meet him yesterday. You had on a dark blue cape. I was sitting near him on the train, and there was a woman with him, looking after him, as gentle as she could be. His wife? Or someone who went from here to bring him home? Or someone from Tokyo? She was exactly like a mother. I was very much impressed. Why didn't you say so last night? Why were you so quiet? Something had upset her. His wife? Komako did not answer. Why didn't you say anything last night? What a strange person you are. Shimamura did not like this sharpness. Nothing he had done and nothing that had happened seemed to call for it, and he wondered if something basic in the woman's nature might not be coming to the surface. Still, when she came at him the second time, he had to admit that he was being hit in a vulnerable spot. This morning, as he glanced at Komako in that mirror reflecting the mountain snow, he had of course thought of the girl in the evening train window. Why then had he said nothing? It doesn't matter if there is a sick man. No one ever comes to my room. Komako went in through an opening in a low stone wall. To the right was a small field, and to the left persimmon trees stood along the wall that marked off the neighboring plot. There seemed to be a flower garden in front of the house, and red carp were swimming in the little lotus pond. The ice had been broken away and lay piled along the bank. The house was old and decayed, like the pitted trunk of a persimmon. There were patches of snow on the roof, the rafters of which sagged to draw a wavy line at the eaves. The air in the earthen-floored hallway was still and cold. Shimamura was led up a ladder before his eyes had become accustomed to the darkness. It was a ladder in the truest sense of the word, and the room at the top was an attic. This is the room the silkworms used to live in. Are you surprised? You're lucky you've never fallen downstairs, drinking the way you do. I have, but generally when I've had too much to drink, I crawl into the kotatsu downstairs and go off to sleep. She pushed her hand tentatively into the kotatsu, then went below for charcoal. Shimamura looked around at the curious room. Although there was but one low window, opening to the south, the freshly changed paper on the door turned off the rays of the sun brightly. The walls had been industriously pasted over with rice paper, so that the effect was rather like the inside of an old-fashioned paper box. But overhead was only the bare roof sloping down toward the window, as if a dark loneliness had settled itself over the room. Wondering what might be on the other side of the wall, Shimamura had the uneasy feeling that he was suspended in a void. But the walls and the floor, for all their shabbiness, were spotlessly clean. For a moment he was taken with a fancy that the light must pass through Komako, living in the silkworm's room as it passed through the translucent silkworms. The kotatsu was covered with a quilt of the same rough striped cotton material as the standard mountain trousers. The chest of drawers was old, but the grain of the wood was fine and straight. Perhaps it was a relic of Komako's years in Tokyo. It was badly paired with a cheap dresser, while the vermilion sewing box gave off the luxurious glow of good lacquer. The boxes stacked along the wall behind a thin woolen curtain apparently served as bookshelves. The kimono of the evening before hung on the wall, open to show the brilliant red underkimono. Komako came spryly up the ladder with a supply of charcoal. It's from the sick room, but you needn't worry. They say fire spreads no germs. Her newly dressed hair almost brushed the kotatsu as she stirred away at the coals. The music teacher's son had intestinal tuberculosis, she said, and had come home to die. But it was not entirely accurate to say that he had come home. He had, as a matter of fact, not been born here. This was his mother's home. His mother had taught dancing down on the coast even when she was no longer a geisha, but she had had a stroke while she was still in her 40s, and had come back to this hot spring to recover. The son, fond of machinery since he was a child, had stayed behind to work in a watch shop. Presently, he moved to Tokyo and started going to night school, and the strain was evidently too much for him. He was only 25. All this Komako told him with no hesitation, but she said nothing about the girl who had brought the man home, and nothing about why she herself was in this house. Shimamura felt most uncomfortable at what she did say, however. Suspended there in the void, she seemed to be broadcasting to the four directions. As he stepped from the hallway, he saw something faintly white through the corner of his eye. It was the samisen box, and it struck him as larger and longer than it should be. He found it hard to imagine her carrying so unwieldy an object to parties. The darkened door inside the hallway slid open. "Do you mind if I step over this, Komako?" It was that clear voice, so beautiful that it was almost sad. Shimamura waited for an echo to come back. It was Yoko's voice, the voice that had called out over the snow to the station master the night before. "No, please go ahead." Yoko stepped lightly over the samisen box, a glass chamber pot in her hand. It was clear, from the familiar way she had talked to the station master the evening before, and from the way she wore mountain trousers, that she was a native of this snow country, but the bold pattern of her obi, half visible over the trousers, made the rough russet and black stripes of the latter seem fresh and cheerful, and for the same reason the long sleeves of her woolen kimono took on a certain voluptuous charm. The trousers, split just below the knees, filled out towards the hips, and the heavy cotton, for all its natural stiffness, was somehow supple and gentle. Yoko darted one quick, piercing glance at Shimamura and went silently out over the earthen floor. Even when he had left the house, Shimamura was haunted by that glance, burning just in front of his forehead. It was cold as a very distant light, for the inexpressible beauty of it had made his heart rise when, the night before, that light off in the mountains had passed across the girl's face in the train window and lighted her eye for a moment. The impression came back to Shimamura, and with it the memory of the mirror filled with snow, and Komako's red cheeks floating in the middle of it. He walked faster. His legs were round and plump, but he was seized with a certain abandon as he walked along gazing at the mountains he was so fond of, and his pace quickened, though he hardly knew it. Always ready to give himself up to reverie, he could not believe that the mirror floating over the evening scenery and the other snowy mirror were really works of man. They were part of nature and part of some distant world. And the room he had only this moment left had become part of the same distant world. Startled at himself, in need of something to cling to, he stopped a blind masseuse at the top of the hill. "Could you give me a massage?" "Let me see. What time will it be?" She tucked her cane under her arm and, taking a covered pocket watch from her obi, felt at the face with her left hand. 2:35. I have an appointment over beyond the station at 3:30, but I suppose it won't matter if I'm a little late. You're very clever to be able to tell the time. It has no glass, and I can feel the hands. You can feel the figures? Not the figures. She took the watch out again, a silver one, large for a woman, and flicked open the lid. She laid her fingers across the face with one at 12 and one at 6, and a third halfway between at 3. I can tell the time fairly well. I may be a minute off one way or the other, but I never miss by as much as 2 minutes. You don't find the road a little slippery? When it rains, my daughter comes to call for me. At night I take care of the people in the village, and never come up this far. The maids at the inn are always joking and saying it's because my husband won't let me go out at night. Your children are growing up? The oldest girl is 12. They had reached Shimamura's room, and they were silent for a time as the massaging began. The sound of a samisen came to them from the distance. Who would that be, I wonder? You can always tell which geisha it is by the tone? I can tell some of them. Some I can't. You must not have to work. Feel how nice and soft you are. No stiff muscles on me. A little stiff here at the base of the neck, but you're just right. Not too fat and not too thin. And you don't drink, do you? You can tell that? I have 3 other customers with physiques exactly like yours. A common sort of physique. But when you don't drink, you don't know what it is really to enjoy yourself, to forget everything that happens. Your husband drinks, does he? Much too much. But whoever it is, she's not much of a musician. Very poor indeed. Do you play yourself? I did when I was young. From the time I was 8 till I was 19. I haven't played in 15 years now. Not since I was married. Did all blind people look younger than they were? Shimamura wondered. But if you learn when you're young, you never forget. My hands have changed from doing this sort of work, but my ear is still good. It makes me very impatient to hear them playing, but then I suppose I felt impatient at my own playing when I was young. She listened for a time. Fumi, at the Izutsuya, maybe. The best ones and the worst are the easiest to tell. There are good ones. Komako is very good. She's young, but she's improved a great deal lately. Really? You know her, don't you? I say she's good, but you have to remember that our standards here in the mountains are not very high. I don't really know her. I was on the train with the music teacher's son last night, though. He's well again? Apparently not. Oh, he's been sick for a long time in Tokyo, and they say it was to help pay the doctor's bills that Komako became a geisha last summer. I wonder if it did any good. Komako, you say? They were only engaged, but I suppose you feel better afterwards if you've done everything you can. She was engaged to him? So they say. I don't really know, but that's the rumor. It was almost too ordinary a thing to hear gossip about geisha from the hot spring masseuse, and that fact had the perverse effect of making the news the more startling. And Komako's having become a geisha to help her fiancé was so ordinary a bit of melodrama that he found himself almost refusing to accept it. Perhaps certain moral considerations, questions of the propriety of selling oneself as a geisha, helped the refusal. Shimamura was beginning to think he would like to go deeper into the story, but the masseuse was silent. If Komako was the man's fiancée, and Yoko was his new lover, and the man was going to die, the expression wasted effort again came into Shimamura's mind. For Komako thus to guard her promise to the end, for her even to sell herself to pay doctor's bills, what was it if not wasted effort? He would accost her with this fact. He would drive it home when he saw her again, he said to himself, and yet her existence seemed to have become purer and cleaner for this new bit of knowledge. Aware of a shameful danger lurking in his numb sense of the false and empty, he lay concentrating on it, trying to feel it, for some time after the masseuse left. He was chilled to the pit of his stomach, but someone had left the windows wide open. The color of evening had already fallen on the mountain valley, early buried in shadows. Out of the dusk, the distant mountains, still reflecting the light of the evening sun, seemed to have come much nearer. Presently, as the mountain chasms were far and near, high and low, the shadows in them began to deepen, and the sky was red over the snowy mountains, bathed now in but a wan light. Cedar groves stood out darkly by the river bank, at the ski ground, around the shrine. Like a warm light, Komako poured in on the empty wretchedness that had assailed Shimamura. There was a meeting at the inn to discuss plans for the ski season. She had been called in for the party afterwards. She put her hands into the kotatsu, then quickly reached up and stroked Shimamura's cheek. You're pale this evening. Very strange. She clutched at the soft flesh of his cheeks as if to tear it away. Aren't you the foolish one, though? She already seemed a little drunk. When she came back from the party, she collapsed before the mirror, and drunkenness came out on her face to almost comic effect. I know nothing about it. Nothing. My head aches. I feel terrible. Terrible. I want a drink. Give me water. She pressed both hands to her face and tumbled over with little concern for her carefully dressed hair. Presently she brought herself up again and began cleaning away the thick powder with cold cream. The face underneath was a brilliant red. She was quite delighted with herself. To Shimamura it was astonishing that drunkenness could pass so quickly. Her shoulders were shaking from the cold. All through August she had been near nervous collapse, she told him quietly. I thought I'd go mad. I kept brooding over something, and I didn't know myself what it was. It was terrifying. I couldn't sleep. I kept myself under control only when I went out to a party. I had all sorts of dreams, and I lost my appetite. I would sit there jabbing at the floor for hours on end, all through the hottest part of the day. When did you first go out as a geisha? In June. I thought for a while I might go to Hamamatsu. Get married? She nodded. The man had been after her to marry him, but she couldn't like him. She had had great trouble deciding what to do. But if you didn't like him, what were you so undecided about? It's not that simple. Marriage has so much charm. Don't be nasty. It's more that I want to have everything around me tidy and in order. Shimamura grunted. You're not a very satisfying person, you know. Was there something between you and the man from Hamamatsu? She flung out her answer. If there had been, do you think I would have hesitated? But he said that as long as I stayed here, he wouldn't let me marry anyone else. He said he would do everything possible to stand in the way. But what could he do from as far away as Hamamatsu? You worried about that? Komako stretched out for a time, enjoying the warmth of her body. When she spoke again, her tone was quite casual. I thought I was pregnant, she giggled. It seems ridiculous when I look back on it now. She curled up like a little child and grabbed at the neck of his kimono with her two fists. The rich eyelashes against him made him think that her eyes were half open. Her elbow against the brazier, Komako was scribbling something on the back of an old magazine when Shimamura awoke the next morning. I can't go home. I jumped up when the maid came to bring charcoal, but it was already broad daylight. The sun was shining in on the door. I was a little drunk last night, and I slept too well. What time is it? It's already 8. Let's go have a bath. Shimamura got out of bed. I can't. Someone might see me in the hall. She was completely tamed. When Shimamura came back from the bath, he found her industriously cleaning the room, a kerchief draped artistically over her head. She had polished the legs of the table and the edge of the brazier almost too carefully, and she stirred up the charcoal with a practiced hand. Shimamura sat idly smoking, his feet in the kotatsu. When the ashes dropped from his cigarette, Komako took them up in a handkerchief and brought him an ashtray. He laughed, a bright morning laugh. Komako laughed too. If you had a husband, you'd spend all your time scolding him. I would not, but I'd be laughed at for folding up even my dirty clothes. I can't help it. That's the way I am. They say you can tell everything about a woman by looking inside her dresser drawers. What a beautiful day. They were having breakfast, and the morning sun flooded the room. I should have gone home early to practice the samisen. The sound is different on a day like this. She looked up at the crystal clear sky. The snow on the distant mountains was soft and creamy, as if veiled in a faint smoke. Shimamura, remembering what the masseuse had said, suggested that she practice here instead. Immediately she telephoned her house to ask for music and a change of clothes. So the house he had seen the day before had a telephone, thought Shimamura. The eyes of the other girl, Yuko, floated into his mind. That girl will bring your music? She might. You're engaged to the son, are you? Well, where did you hear that? When did you hear that? Yesterday. Aren't you strange? If you heard it yesterday, why didn't you tell me? But her tone showed none of the sharpness of the day before. Today there was only a clean smile on her face. That sort of thing would be easier to talk about if I had less respect for you. What are you really thinking, I wonder? That's why I don't like Tokyo people. You're trying to change the subject. You haven't answered my question, you know. I'm not trying to change the subject. You really believed it? I did. You're lying again. You didn't really. I couldn't quite believe all of it, as a matter of fact, but they said you went to work as a geisha to help pay doctor's bills. It sounds like something out of a cheap magazine, but it's not true. I was never engaged to him. People seem to think I was, though. It wasn't to help anyone in particular that I became a geisha, but I owe a great deal to his mother, and I had to do what I could. You're talking in riddles. I'll tell you everything, very clearly. There does seem to have been a time when his mother thought it would be a good idea for us to get married, but she only thought it. She never said a word. Both of us knew in a vague sort of way what was on her mind, but it went no farther, and that's all there is to tell. Childhood friends? That's right, but we've lived most of our lives apart. When they sent me to Tokyo to be a geisha, he was the only one who saw me off. I have that written down on the very first page of my very oldest diary. If the two of you had stayed together, you'd probably be married by now. I doubt it. You would be, though. You needn't worry about him. He'll be dead before long. But is it right for you to be spending your nights away from home? It's not right for you to ask. How can a dying man keep me from doing as I like? Shimamura could think of no answer. Why was it that Komako said not a word about the girl Yoko? And Yoko, who had taken care of the sick man on the train, quite as his mother must have when he was very young, how would she feel coming to an end with a change of kimono for Komako, who was something, Shimamura could not know what, to the man Yoko had come home with? Shimamura found himself off in his usual distant fantasies. Komako, Komako. Yoko's beautiful voice was low but clear. Thank you very much. Komako went out in the dressing room. You brought it yourself, did you? It must have been heavy. Yoko left immediately. The top string snapped as Komako plucked tentatively at the samisen. Shimamura could tell even while she was changing a string and tuning the instrument that she had a firm, confident touch. She took up a bulky bundle and undid it on the kotatsu. Inside were an ordinary book of lyrics and some 20 scores. Shimamura glanced curiously at the latter. You practice from these? I have to. There's no one here who can teach me. What about the woman you live with? She's paralyzed. If she can talk, she ought to be able to help you. But she can't talk. She can still use her left hand to correct mistakes in dancing, but it only annoys her to have to listen to the samisen and not be able to do anything about it. Can you really understand the music from only a score? I understand it very well. The publishing gentleman would be happy if he knew he had a real geisha, not just an ordinary amateur, practicing from his scores way off here in the mountains. In Tokyo, I was expected to dance, and they gave me dancing lessons. But I got only the faintest idea of how to play the samisen. If I were to lose that, there would be no one here to teach me again. So I used scores. And singing? I don't like to sing. I did learn a few songs from my dancing, and I managed to get through them, but newer things I've had to pick up from the radio. I have no idea how near right I am. My own private style. You'd laugh at it, I know. And then my voice gives out when I'm singing for someone I know well. It's always loud and brave for strangers. She looked a little bashful for a moment, then brought herself up and glanced at Shimamura as though signaling that she was ready for him to begin. He was embarrassed. He was unfortunately no singer. He was generally familiar with the Nagauta music of the Tokyo Theater and Dance, and he knew the words to most of the repertoire. He had had no formal training, however. Indeed, he associated the Nagauta less with the parlor performance of the geisha than with the actor on the stage. The customer is being difficult. Giving her lower lip a quick little bite, Komako brought the samisen to her knee, and as if that made her a different person, turned earnestly to the lyrics before her. I've been practicing this one since last fall. A chill swept over Shimamura. The goose flesh seemed to rise even to his cheeks. The first notes opened a transparent emptiness deep in his entrails, and in the emptiness the sound of the samisen reverberated. He was startled, or better, he fell back as under a well-aimed blow, taken with a feeling almost of reverence, washed by waves of remorse, defenseless, quite deprived of strength. There was nothing for him to do but give himself up to the current, to the pleasure of being swept off wherever Komako would take him. She was a mountain geisha, not yet 20, and she could hardly be as good as all that, he told himself. And in spite of the fact that she was in a small room, was she not slamming away at the instrument as though she were on the stage? He was being carried away by his own mountain emotionalism. Komako purposely read the words in a monotone, now slowing down and now jumping over a passage that was too much trouble, but gradually she seemed to fall into a spell. As her voice rose higher, Shimamura began to feel a little frightened. How far would that strong, sure touch take him? He rolled over and pillowed his head on an arm, as if in bored indifference. The end of the song released him. Ah, this woman is in love with me. but he was annoyed with himself for the thought. Komako looked up at the clear sky over the snow. The tone is different on a day like this. The tone had been as rich and vibrant as her remark suggested. The air was different. There were no theater walls, there was no audience, there was none of the city dust. The notes went out crystalline into the clean white winter morning to sound on the far snowy peaks. Practicing alone, not aware herself of what was happening, perhaps, but with all the wideness of nature in this mountain valley for her companion, she had come quite as a part of nature to take on this special power. Her very loneliness beat down sorrow and fostered a wild strength of will. There was no doubt that it had been a great victory of the will, even granted that she had had no amount of preparatory training for her to learn complicated airs from only a score, and presently go through them from memory. To Shimamura, it was wasted effort, this way of living. He sensed in it, too, a longing that called out to him for sympathy. But the life and way of living no doubt flowed thus grandly from the samisen with a new worth for Komako herself. Shimamura, untrained in the niceties of samisen technique and conscious only of the emotion in the tone, was perhaps an ideal audience for Komako. By the time she had begun her third song, the voluptuous softness of the music itself may have been responsible. The chill in the goose flesh had disappeared, and Shimamura, relaxed and warm, was gazing into Komako's face. A feeling of intense physical nearness came over him. The high, thin nose was usually a little lonely, a little sad, but today, with the healthy, vital flush on her cheeks, it was rather whispering, "I am here too." The smooth lips seemed to reflect back a dancing light even when they were drawn into a tight bud, and when for a moment they were stretched wide, as the singing demanded, they were quick to contract again into that engaging little bud. Their charm was exactly like the charm of her body itself. Her eyes, moist and shining, made her look like a very young girl. She wore no powder, and the polish of the city geisha had over it a layer of mountain color. Her skin, suggesting the newness of a freshly peeled onion or perhaps a lily bulb, was flushed faintly, even to the throat. More than anything, it was clean. Seated rigidly upright, she seemed more demure and maidenly than usual. This time, using a score, she sang a song she had not yet finished memorizing. At the end, she silently pushed the plectrum under the strings and let herself fall into an easier posture. Her manner quickly took on a touch of the seductive and alluring. Shimamura could think of nothing to say. Komako did not seem to care particularly what he thought of her playing, however. She was quite unaffectedly pleased with herself. "Can you always tell which geisha it is from the tone of the samisen?" "That's easy. There aren't 20 of us all together. It depends a little on the style, though. The individual comes out more in some styles than in others." She took up the samisen again and shifted her weight so that her feet were a little to one side and the instrument rested on the calf of one leg. "That is the way you hold it when you're small." She leaned toward the samisen as though it were too large for her. Dark hair. Her voice was deliberately childish, and she picked out the notes uncertainly. "Dark hair was the first one you learned?" "Uh-huh." She shook her head girlishly, as no doubt she did in the days when she was still too small to hold the samisen properly. Komako no longer tried to leave before daybreak when she stayed the night. Komako, the 2-year-old daughter of the innkeeper, would call from far down the hall, her voice rising in the mountain country lilt. The two of them would play happily in the kotatsu until nearly noon, when they would go for a bath. Back from the bath, Komako was combing her hair. Whenever the child sees a geisha, she calls out Komako in that funny accent, and when she sees a picture of someone with their hair done in the old way, that's Komako too. Children can tell when you like them. "Come, Kimi, let's go play at Komako's." She stood up to leave, then sat down lazily on the veranda. Eager people from Tokyo, already out skiing. The room looked from high ground directly south over the ski runs at the base of the mountain. Shimamura glanced up from the kotatsu. There were patches of snow on the mountain, and 5 or 6 figures in black ski clothes were moving about in the terraced fields. It seemed a trifle silly. The slope was a gentle one, and the walls between the fields were not yet covered with snow. They look like students. Is today Sunday? Do you suppose that's fun? They're good, though, Komako said, as if to herself. Guests are always surprised when a geisha says hello to them on the ski grounds. They don't recognize her for the snow burn. At night, the powder hides it. You wear ski clothes? She wore mountain trousers, she said, but what a nuisance the ski season is. It's all coming again. You see them in the evening at the inn, and they say they'll see you again the next day skiing. Maybe I should give up skiing this year. Goodbye. Come along, Kimi. We'll have snow this evening. It's always cold the night before it snows. Shimamura went out to the veranda. Komako was leading Kimi down the steep road below the ski grounds. The sky was clouding over. Mountains still in the sunlight stood out against shadowed mountains. The plays of light and shade changed from moment to moment, sketching a chilly landscape. Presently the ski grounds, too, were in shadow. Below the window Shimamura could see little needles of frost, like isinglass among the withered chrysanthemums, though water was still dripping from the snow on the roof. It did not snow that evening. A hailstorm turned to rain. Shimamura called Komako again the night before he was to leave. It was a clear moonlit night. At 11 o'clock, the air was bitterly cold, but Komako insisted on going for a walk. She pulled him roughly from the kotatsu. The road was frozen. The village lay quiet under the cold sky. Komako hitched up the skirt of her kimono and tucked it into her obi. The moon shone like a blade frozen in blue ice. We'll go to the station, said Komako. You're insane. It's more than a mile each way. You will be going back to Tokyo soon. We'll go look at the station. Shimamura was numb from his shoulders to his thighs. Back in his room, Komako sank disconsolately to the floor. Her head was bowed and her arms were deep in the kotatsu. Strangely, she refused to go with him to the bath. Bedding had been laid out with the foot of the mattress inside the kotatsu. Komako was sitting forlornly beside it when Shimamura came back from the bath. She said nothing. What's the matter? I'm going home. Don't be foolish. Go on to bed. Just let me sit here for a little while. Why do you want to go home? I'm not going home. I'll sit here till morning. Don't be difficult. I'm not being difficult. I'm not being difficult. Then, I don't feel well. Is that all? Shimamura laughed. I'll leave you quite to yourself. No. And why did you have to go out and run all over town? I'm going home. There's no need to go home. But it's not easy for me. Go on back to Tokyo. It's not easy for me. Her face was low over the kotatsu. Was it sorrow at finding herself about to sink into too deep a relationship with a traveler, or at having to keep herself under control at so dear a moment? She has come that far, then, Shimamura said to himself. He, too, was silent for a time. Please go back to Tokyo. As a matter of fact, I was thinking of going back tomorrow. No, why are you going back? She looked up, startled as though aroused from sleep. What can I do for you, no matter how long I stay? She gazed at him for a moment, then burst out violently. You don't have to say that. What reason have you got to say that? She stood up irritably and threw herself at his neck. It's wrong of you to say such things. Get up, I tell you. The words poured out deliriously, and she fell down beside him, quite forgetting in her derangement the physical difficulty she had spoken of earlier. Some time later, she opened warm, moist eyes. She picked up the hair ornament that had fallen to the floor. You really must go back tomorrow, she said quietly. As Shimamura was changing clothes to leave on the 3 o'clock train the next afternoon, The manager of the inn beckoned Komako into the hall. Let's see. Suppose we make it about 11 hours. He could hear Komako's answer. They were evidently discussing the bill for her services as a geisha, and the manager perhaps thought it would be unreasonable to charge for the whole 16 or 17 hours. The bill, as a matter of fact, was computed by the hour, left at 5 or left at 12, without the usual charge for overnight services. Komako, in an overcoat and a white scarf, saw him to the station. Even when he had finished buying presents to take back to Tokyo, he had some 20 minutes to kill. Walking with Komako in the slightly raised station plaza, he thought what a narrow little valley it was, crowded in among the snowy mountains. Komako's too black hair was a little touching, a little sad, in the loneliness of the shadowed mountain pocket. The sun shone dimly on a spot in the mountains far down the river. It's melted a good deal since I came. 2 days of snow, though, and we'll have 6 feet. Then it snows again, and before long the lights on those poles are out of sight. I'll walk along thinking of you, and I'll find myself strung up on a wire. The snow is that deep? They say that in the next town up the line, the school children jump naked from the second floor of the dormitory. They sink out of sight in the snow, and they move around under it as though they were swimming. Look, a snowplow. I'd like to see it that deep, but I suppose the inn will be crowded, and there might be danger of slides along the way. With you, it's not a question of money, is it? Have you always had so much to spend? She turned to look up at his face. Why don't you grow a mustache? I thought of it. Shimamura, freshly shaven, stroked the blue-black traces of his beard. A deep line from the corner of his mouth set off the softness of his cheek. Was that, he wondered, what Komako found attractive? You always look a little as though you just shaved too when you take off that powder. Listen, the crows. That frightening way they sometimes have. Where are they, I wonder? And it isn't cold. Komako hugged herself as she looked up at the sky. Shall we go in by the stove? A figure in mountain trousers came running up the wide road from the main highway into the station plaza. It was Yoko. Komako. Yukio. Komako. She panted, clinging to Komako like a child that has run frightened to its mother. Come home, right away. Yukio's worse. Right away. Komako closed her eyes, as if from the pain of the assault on her shoulder. Her face was white, but she shook her head with surprising firmness. I can't go home. I'm seeing off a guest. Shimamura was startled. You needn't see me off. It's not right to leave. How do I know you'll come again? I'll come. Yoko seemed not to hear the exchange. I just called the inn, she went on feverishly, and they said you were at the station, so I came here. I ran all the way. Yukio is asking for you. She pulled at Komako, but Komako shook her off impatiently. Leave me alone. It was Komako who reeled back, however. She retched violently, but nothing came from her mouth. The rims of her eyes were moist. There was goose flesh on her cheeks. Yoko stood rigid, gazing at Komako. Her face, like a mask, wore an expression of such utter earnestness that it was impossible to tell whether she was angry or surprised or grieved. It seemed an extraordinarily pure and simple face to Shimamura. She turned quickly and without the slightest change of expression, clutched at Shimamura's hand. I'm sorry, but would you let her go home? A tense, high-pitched voice assailed him. Let her go home. Of course I'll let her go home. Go on home, he called out to Komako. Don't be a fool. And what say do you have in the matter? Komako pushed Yoko roughly away from him. Shimamura tried to signal the taxi waiting in front of the station. Yoko clutched at his arm so tightly that his fingers were numbed. I'll send her home in a taxi, he said. Why don't you go on ahead? People will be watching us. Yoko nodded quickly and turned away with almost unbelievable alacrity. Why was the girl always so earnest, so sober, Shimamura wondered. but such musings did not seem entirely in keeping with the occasion. That voice, so beautiful it was almost lonely, lingered in Shimamura's ears as if it were echoing back from somewhere in the snowy mountains. "Where are you going?" Komako pulled at Shimamura. He had signaled the taxi and was walking toward it. "I won't. I'm not going home." For an instant, Shimamura felt something very near physical revulsion. "I don't know what there is among the three of you, but the man may be dying even now. She came for you, didn't she? Because he wants to see you. Go home like a good girl. You will regret it all your life if you don't. What if he dies even while you're standing here? Don't be stubborn. Forgive and forget." "Forgive and forget? You don't understand. You don't understand at all. And when they sent you to Tokyo, he was the only one who saw you off, didn't you say? Do you think it's right not to say goodbye to the man you yourself said was on the very first page of the very first volume of your diary? This is the very last page of his. But I don't want to. I don't want to see a man die. It could have been the coldest heartlessness or too warm a passion. It could have been the coldest heartlessness or too warm a passion. Shimamura did not know which. I'll not be able to write in my diary anymore. I'll burn it," she said softly, almost to herself. Her cheeks were flushed. "You're a good, simple person at heart, aren't you? If you really are, I won't mind sending my whole diary to you. You won't laugh at me? You're a good, honest person at heart, I'm sure." Shimamura was moved by a wave of feeling he could not define himself. He thought he must indeed be the plainest, most honest person in the world. He no longer worried about sending Komako home. She said nothing more. A potter from the inn came to tell them that the gate to the tracks was open. 4 or 5 villagers in somber winter dress got on and off the train. "I'll not go to the platform with you. Goodbye." Komako stood inside the closed window of the waiting room. From the train window, it was as though one strange piece of fruit had been left behind in the grimy glass case of a shabby mountain grocery. The window of the waiting room was clear for an instant as the train started to move. Komako's face glowed forth and as quickly disappeared. It was the bright red it had been in the mirror that snowy morning, and for Shimamura, that color again seemed to be the point at which he parted with reality. The train climbed the north slope of the border range into the long tunnel. On the far side, it moved down a mountain valley. The color of evening was descending from chasms between the peaks. The dim brightness of the winter afternoon seemed to have been sucked into the earth, and the battered old train had shed its bright shell in the tunnel. There was no snow on the south slope. Following a stream, the train came out on the plain. A mountain cut at the top in curious notches and spires fell off in a graceful sweep to the far skirts. Over it, the moon was rising. The solid integral shape of the mountain, taking up the whole of the evening landscape there at the end of the plain, was set off in a deep purple against the pale light of the sky. The moon was no longer an afternoon white, but, faintly colored, it had not yet taken on the clear coldness of the winter night. There was not a bird in the sky. Nothing broke the lines of the wide skirts to the right and the left. Where the mountain swept down to meet the river, a stark white building, a hydroelectric plant perhaps, stood out sharply from the withered scene the train window framed, one last spot saved from the night. The window began to steam over. The landscape outside was dusky, and the figures of the passengers floated up half-transparent. It was the play of that evening mirror again. The train, probably no more than 3 or 4 worn-out, faded, old-fashioned coaches strung together, was not from the same world as the trains one finds on the main lines. The light inside was dim. Shimamura abandoned himself to the fancy that he had stepped into some unreal conveyance, that he was being borne away in emptiness, cut off from time and place. The monotonous sound of the wheels became the woman's voice. Her words, though short and broken, were a sign that she was alive in all her vital intensity, and he knew he had not forgotten her from the fact that listening was a trial. But to the Shimamura of that moment, moving away from the woman, The voice was already a distant one that could do no more than sharpen the poignancy of travel. Would Yukio be breathing his last even now? Komako had for reasons of her own refused to go home, and had she then failed to reach his bedside in time? There were so few passengers that Shimamura felt a little uneasy. Besides Shimamura himself, there was only a man, probably in his 50s, and opposite him a red-faced girl. A black shawl was thrown over the full flesh of her shoulders, and her cheeks were a wonderful fiery red. She leaned slightly forward to catch every word the man said, and she answered him happily. A pair off on a long journey together, Shimamura concluded. As the train pulled into a station behind which rose the chimneys of spinning factories, however, the man hastily got up, took a wicker trunk from the baggage rack, and threw it out the window to the platform. "Maybe we'll meet again sometime," he called back to the girl as he hurried from the train. Shimamura suddenly wanted to weep. He had been caught quite off guard, and it struck him afresh that he had said goodbye to the woman and was on his way home. He had not considered the possibility that the two had simply met on the train. The man was perhaps a traveling salesman. End of part 1.